It was a quiet, cold Saturday evening, a few weeks after the divorce papers had been signed, and the life I'd known for over 2 decades had come to a shuddering halt. I was still getting used to the emptiness, the eerie silence of a home once filled with weekend laughter and shared family rituals. One such tradition was our weekly visit to the bathhouse, a small but treasured escape where my husband, my son Alex, and I could unwind and reconnect in the warm, steamy sanctuary. After the divorce, Alex had insisted that we continue the tradition, just the two of us. At first, I resisted. It felt strange, even sad, to continue a ritual so tied to a family unit that was now broken. But Alex was adamant, his determination breaking through my hesitation. "Come on, Mum," he had said, his tone light but firm. "It doesn't have to change everything." And so we packed our bags that evening and headed out. The bathhouse wasn't crowded, it rarely was in winter. The air was heavy with the scent of cedar and steam as we entered. It had been a long time since I'd felt such warmth, not just physically, but emotionally, like a cocoon against the biting cold of the world outside. Alex had grown so much over the years. At 22, he was no longer the wide-eyed boy who splashed around in the shallow pool and made waves for fun. He was a man now, tall and composed, his broad shoulders and quiet confidence a reflection of his maturity. Yet his eyes, kind and familiar, still held the warmth that reminded me of his father. As we settled into one of the private family steam rooms, the room felt intimate but not oppressive. The two of us sat side by side on the wooden bench, wrapped in towels, a gentle hiss of steam enveloping us. "You seem better," Alex said after a moment, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost timid. I looked at him, surprised. "Better since all this?" His eyes flicked to mine, holding them for a moment before darting away. "I mean, it's been a rough couple of months." I took a deep breath, feeling the steam ease the tension in my shoulders. "I don't know about better, maybe just adjusting." He nodded, his expression softening. "That's something." For a while we sat in silence, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable, but contemplative. The rhythmic hum of the steam soothed my thoughts, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of peace. Alex leaned back, his head against the wooden wall, and I marveled at how much he'd grown, not just physically, but emotionally. He had been my rock through the divorce in ways I hadn't expected. Calm, steady, always knowing when to offer support without asking for anything in return. As the minutes passed, I realized how much I cherished those moments with him. The world outside could be chaotic and unfriendly, but here, in this little sanctuary, it was just us. Two people bound by something deeper than shared blood. "Remember when we used to come here and you'd beg to sit in the sauna for hours?" I said with a small smile, breaking the silence. Alex laughed, a deep, sincere sound that warmed the room more than the steam. "Yeah, and Dad always made me leave after 10 minutes because he was convinced I'd overheat." "Or because he couldn't stand the heat himself," I teased, and for the first time in months the mention of my ex-husband didn't sting. We spent the next hour moving between the steam room, the pool and the lounge area, reminiscing about those simpler times. I was struck by how natural it felt to talk to Alex, how the dynamic between us had subtly shifted over the years. He wasn't just my son, he was a confidant, a partner in navigating this strange, uncharted chapter of life. As the evening drew to a close, we sat together in the quiet corner of the lounge, sipping tea. Alex reached out, his hand resting lightly on mine. "You're going to be okay, you know," he said quietly. I blinked back sudden tears, surprised at the depth of emotion in his voice. "You think so?" "I know so," he said, his gaze steady and unwavering. "We both will." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I believed him. In the weeks that followed, our Saturday nights at the bathhouse became a comforting constant in a world that had otherwise been turned on its axis. Each visit was like a sacred ritual, A quiet escape from the outside world where everything felt too raw, too uncertain. Here, surrounded by warmth and steam, the silence was never awkward. It was an unspoken understanding, a shared space where words often felt unnecessary. It was on one of these evenings, perhaps the third or fourth since the divorce, that I first realized how much I had come to look forward to our time together. Not just the relaxation or the solitude, but the way Alex made me feel less alone. His presence was grounding, a steady anchor in a life that sometimes felt adrift. That night he was waiting for me by the steam room, his towel casually draped over his shoulders. There was a lightness about him that hadn't always been there. He smiled as I approached, and I couldn't help but smile back, the familiar sight of him bringing a warmth that had nothing to do with the bathhouse. "You're late," he teased, opening the door to let me in. I rolled my eyes and walked past him with a grin. "I'm the one who drives you here, remember? If I'm late, it's your fault too." He laughed, a sound that echoed softly in the wooden chamber. By the time we settled on the benches, the steam was already swirling around us, curling into thick tendrils that softened the edges of the world. Alex leaned back, his head against the wall, and for a moment I allowed myself to just look at him. It wasn't that I hadn't noticed before, but something about the intimacy of these evenings had sharpened my awareness of him. The way his shoulders filled the space beside me, the quiet strength in his posture. There was a maturity about him now, a quiet confidence that made him seem older than his years. "Are you all right, Mum?" he asked, catching me off guard. His eyes were kind, filled with the same concern that had seen me through so many difficult days. I nodded quickly, brushing a strand of damp hair from my face. "Of course, just thinking." "About what?" "About how much I enjoy these nights with you," I said honestly, the words tumbling out before I had a chance to think them over. "It's nice to have this time together." He smiled, and there was something in his expression, something warm and unguarded, that made my chest tighten. "Yes," he said quietly, "it is." The air between us felt heavier after that, though not in an uncomfortable way. It was just charged, as if some unspoken truth hung in the space between us, waiting to be acknowledged. I didn't know what to make of it, if it was all in my head or if Alex felt it too. That night, as we moved between the steam room and the plunge pool, I found myself noticing little things. The way his eyes lingered on me when he thought I wasn't looking, the way his hand brushed over mine as he handed me a towel, the touch lasting just a second longer than it should have. I told myself I was imagining things. He was my son, after all. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting between us, developing into something I didn't quite understand. When our next visit came around, I found myself looking forward to it in a different way. There was an anticipation that hadn't been there before, a quiet excitement that I tried to ignore but couldn't. Alex seemed to sense it too. There was a lightness in his step as we entered the bathhouse, an eagerness in the way he led the way to our favorite steam room. As we settled in, the familiar warmth enveloping us, I couldn't help but be grateful for these moments. The world outside was cold and uncertain, but here it was just us. The steam enveloped us like a cocoon, and for a while nothing else mattered. We talked more than usual that night, the conversation flowing easily between memories of the past and dreams of the future. He told me about his plans for work, the things he wanted to achieve. I listened, captivated by the quiet passion in his voice, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about the things that mattered to him. "You're amazing, you know that," I said suddenly, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Alex blinked, his expression softening. "Mum, no, really," I insisted. "I don't think I tell you enough. You're such a good person, Alex. Your father and I couldn't have asked for a better son." His eyes met mine, and for a moment the air between us was impossibly still. "You're pretty amazing too, you know," he said quietly. "You've been through so much and you're still here." The way he said it, the way his voice dipped slightly at that last word, sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool air outside the steam room. I opened my mouth to reply, but the words caught in my throat, and I could only nod. Later that evening, as we sat together in the lounge, sipping tea and wrapped in fluffy robes, I felt a strange sense of contentment settle over me. Alex was watching me, his expression unreadable, and for a moment I wondered what he was thinking. "You know," he said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence, "I don't think I've ever felt closer to you than I do right now." I looked at him, startled by the vulnerability in his tone. "Alex ... "I'm serious," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "These last few weeks, it's been hard, yes, but it's also been good. Being with you like this, it's like..." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "It's like I'm finally seeing you for who you really are." I didn't know what to say. All I knew was that something in his words, in the way he looked at me, changed everything. The boundaries between us, once so clear and defined, had begun to blur, and for the first time I wasn't sure how I felt about it. The following Saturday, there was an unmistakable weight in the air between us, a mixture of anticipation and something deeper that neither of us dared to name. Alex met me at the door, his easy smile a little softer, his eyes lingering a moment longer than usual. There was an energy between us that I couldn't deny, though I kept telling myself it was nothing, just a mother and son navigating the new closeness that had grown between them. At the bathhouse, it felt different. As we settled into our usual routine of steam room and plunge pool, Alex seemed calmer, more reflective. It wasn't until we were sitting in the lounge with cups of tea that he broke the silence. "Hey," he said, his tone light but curious. "Have you had a massage here before?" I looked at him over the edge of my cup, surprised. "No, I haven't. Why?" He shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I just thought it would be nice. You've seemed a bit tense lately." I raised an eyebrow, though his observation wasn't wrong. The weight of the divorce, the upheaval in our lives, it was all still there, lingering beneath the surface. "Tense, huh?" He chuckled. "You deserve to relax, Mum. Let me book you one." I waved him off. "Alex, you don't need to." "I insist." His tone was playful, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that made me pause. "Really, let me do this for you." Before I could protest further, he was at the counter talking to the receptionist. When he returned, he had a triumphant grin on his face. "You're all set." But he hesitated, his grin turning shy. "I kind of booked one for myself too," I laughed, shaking my head. "Of course you did." The massage was heavenly, every knot of tension in my back and shoulders melting away under the skilled hands of the therapist. By the time it was over, I felt lighter, my body more relaxed than it had been in years. Alex met me in the lounge afterwards, his expression blissful. "So?" he asked, tilting his head as he studied me. "How do you feel?" "Like I could float out of here," I admitted, drawing a laugh from him. Good, that was the goal. Later that evening, as we lingered in one of the smaller steam rooms, Alex stretched out on the bench next to me, his movements slow and languid. I glanced at him, noticing the lightness of his posture, the quiet contentment in his expression. "You know," I said, breaking the silence, "you're right. This was exactly what I needed." "See?" He grinned, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "I know what's good for you, Mum." I nudged him lightly with my elbow, though his words warmed me in a way I didn't quite understand. "Maybe I should return the favor," I said, half joking. "Give you a massage sometime." He raised an eyebrow, his grin softening. "Are you offering?" I hesitated, though there was no reason for the sudden flutter in my chest. "Why not? Fair's fair, right?" Alex sat up, his eyes suddenly more focused. "You don't have to, you know. I just want you to relax tonight." "I know." I smiled at him, the warmth of the room making the moment strangely intimate. "But I want to. You've done so much for me these past few weeks. It's the least I can do." Back at home, the atmosphere was quieter but no less charged. Alex had taken my offer seriously, and now he lay face down on the couch, his broad back exposed, as I carefully worked the tension from his shoulders. My hands moved tentatively at first, unsure how much pressure to apply, but as he hummed in approval, I grew bolder. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked, his voice muffled by the cushion beneath him. "I didn't," I admitted with a laugh. "I'm just guessing." "Well, your guesses are pretty good." He let out a deep sigh, his muscles softening under my touch. "You're a natural." Something about the way he said it, his voice deep and almost reverent, sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to ignore it, concentrating instead on the knots beneath my fingertips, but the closeness of the moment made it difficult. "Does this help?" I asked after a while, my voice lower than I had intended. He turned his head slightly, just enough to meet my eyes. "Yes," he said quietly, "it helps a lot." For a moment the room was impossibly quiet, the only sound the low hum of the heater in the corner. I didn't know what to say, how to respond to the way his gaze lingered, heavy with something unspoken. "Okay," I said finally, breaking the silence as I pulled my hands away. "I think that's enough for one night." Alex sat up slowly, his movements deliberate as he stretched. "Thanks, Mum," he said, his voice warm. "Really?" The next week at the bathhouse, the tension between us was palpable, though neither of us acknowledged it. It was there in the way his eyes lingered on me, in the way his hand brushed against mine as he handed me a towel. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things, but the heat that rose in my chest every time he looked at me said otherwise. After our usual rounds in the steam room and plunge pool, we found ourselves back in the massage lounge. This time, Alex didn't suggest making another appointment, you know, he said casually, leaning back in his chair. "I think I'd rather have another one of your massages." His words took me by surprise, although I tried to hide it. "Oh, really?" "Yeah." His gaze was steady, unflinching. "You're better than the professionals anyway." I laughed, though the sound was too loud in the quiet room. "Flattery will get you anywhere, Alex." He grinned, his expression softening. "Good to know." Later that night, as I lay in bed replaying the events of the evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us. The lines that had once seemed so clear were blurring, and for the first time I wasn't sure how to navigate them. But one thing I did know was that I was looking forward to next Saturday more than I cared to admit. The following Saturday, I was a little late. A work email had delayed me, and I rushed downstairs to find Alex waiting for me at the front door. I stopped short when I saw him, the air leaving my lungs in a soft, startled exhalation. He was holding flowers. "Alex," I said, blinking at the bouquet in his hands. It was a mixture of white lilies and soft pink roses, elegant and understated, but utterly beautiful. "What's this?" He shrugged, his expression almost shy. "I just thought you deserved it. You've been amazing lately, Mum. I wanted to do something nice for you." My heart swelled at his words, my throat tightening as I took the bouquet from him. "You didn't have to do that," I murmured, though my smile betrayed how much the gesture meant to me. "I wanted to," he said simply, his eyes meeting mine with an openness that made my chest ache. "You've been through so much and you're still you." I didn't know what to say. My fingers brushed over the delicate petals as I tried to find the words, but none of them felt appropriate. So instead, I placed the flowers on the counter and turned back to him, wrapping my arms around his shoulders in a hug that was both spontaneous and instinctive. "Thank you," I whispered against his chest, my voice barely audible. "That means so much." His arms tightened around me, his warmth enveloping me in a way that felt protective, grounding. For a long moment we just stood there, neither of us speaking. Then he leaned back slightly, just enough to plant a kiss on my cheek. The gesture was gentle, lingering, and it left a warmth that had nothing to do with the steam room we were about to visit. "Any time," he said softly, his voice low and steady. That evening, as we walked into the bathhouse together, I couldn't help but feel the difference in the air between us. There was a closeness now that hadn't been there before, a quiet understanding that made every glance, every brush of his hand against mine feel heavier. We went through our usual routine, but everything felt more deliberate. The steam room seemed quieter, the air thicker with something unspoken. Even the water in the plunge pool felt warmer, as if it carried the remnants of the tension that had simmered between us. At one point, as we sat together in the lounge sipping tea, Alex reached out and lightly brushed his hand against mine. It was a small gesture, but it still sent a shiver down my spine. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "these Saturdays are the best part of my week." I looked at him, startled by the quiet intensity in his voice. "They are," he nodded, his eyes meeting mine. "I mean, I know they started as a way to keep normal after everything, but now—" He hesitated, his eyes dropping to his hands. "Now they're just important to me." His words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I didn't know how to respond, what to do with the warmth spreading through my chest. So I just nodded, my voice barely above a whisper as I said, "I care about them too." Later that night, as we were getting ready to leave, Alex pulled me aside near the entrance. The bathhouse was quiet now. Most of the other customers had left for the evening. The dim light cast long shadows across the walls, making the room feel more intimate than ever. "Hey," he said quietly, his hand brushing against my arm. "I've been meaning to ask, how are you, really?" The question took me by surprise. "I'm fine," I said automatically, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. "Are you?" he pressed, his eyes searching mine. "Because it's okay if you're not. I want you to know that I'm here for you, always." The sincerity in his voice, the quiet determination in his gaze, it was overwhelming. I felt a lump form in my throat as I nodded, unable to trust myself to speak. "Come here," he said, his voice so soft it almost knocked me out. Before I could respond, he pulled me into another embrace, his arms wrapped around me with a tenderness that made my chest ache. His hand rested lightly on the back of my head, his fingers gently running through my hair as he held me close. I let myself relax into the embrace, my cheek pressed against his chest as I closed my eyes. "You're amazing," he murmured, his voice so low I could barely hear it. "I hope you know that." My heart raced, my thoughts a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't quite untangle. When he finally pulled away, his hands rested lightly on my shoulders, his gaze holding mine with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. And then he leaned in and planted another kiss on my cheek. This one lasted a moment longer than it should have, the warmth of his lips sending a shiver down my spine. "Good night, Mum," he said softly, his voice low and steady. I watched him walk away, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. The lines between us had always been clear, but now they felt blurred, shifting in ways I wasn't sure of. I understood. Over the next week, Alex's gesture stayed with me. Every time I saw the flowers on the counter, their petals soft and alive, I was reminded of his words, the way his arms had felt around me, the warmth of his kiss on my cheek. It was all so innocent, so simple, and yet it wasn't. When Saturday finally arrived, I found myself filled with equal parts anticipation and trepidation. I didn't know what to expect, how to navigate the growing closeness between us. But when Alex met me at the door, his smile soft and his eyes warm, I felt myself relax. "Ready?" he asked, his voice light but tinged with something deeper. I nodded, returning his smile as I reached for my bag. "Always,"